was obscure. But for some reason, people suddenly are enamored with it.
Cocaine.
Now? Well, I'll obviously first, and then I'll.
Point my general direction, I'll be out.
Right, gotcha.
They're all different. Ron's group there.
Well, welcome everybody. I apologize for the delay, but we're gonna try to go ahead and get started here. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Greg Sly. I'm the Assistant Director of Library and Archives here at the York County History Center. A few announcements. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel later. For our upcoming programs, on March 21st, we'll have Spirits of the Past, which will celebrate women's history with a focus on female bartenders and their cocktails. On March 30th, the Friends of the York County History Center will have their annual spring luncheon called If These Walls Could Talk. This year's event features a presentation on the history of the Valencia Ballroom with speakers Jamie Norpel and Dominish Miller, co-host of York's Hometown History, along with music from the Generations Big Band. Lastly, on April 6th, the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society will be meeting, and Tyler Stump will present on Parview State Hospital. And to register for these programs or more information on the programs, visit our website at yorkhistorycenter.org. And now I'll hand things over to John.
Good evening, everyone. I work here as a staff member at the York History Center, and some of you may remember we had our first Civil War event here in a very long while, and I'm very happy to announce we're having our second one, hopefully our second of many annual events here. This year's event will be on July 12th. That's again a Saturday. Should be bigger and better than last year. We're going to incorporate, we're going to use all three of our facilities down here. The new steam plant museum and the colonial complex. So both the courthouse and the Gates and Plow House will be having living history with 87 Pennsylvania. The lovely and talented Scott Mingus will be speaking, as well as Jim McClure again. Scott Rosenau and Civil War Roundtable will be presenting, as well as having a table. Lebanon Cemetery will have a table also presenting. Hometown History with Dominish Miller and Jamie Norpel will be presenting. If you're not familiar with them, there's some teachers up at Northeastern school system, and they call themselves Bobblehead George, and they have a really fun educational channel on YouTube that they go all over doing historical things like going to James Buchanan's house, Mount Vernon, etc. But they will be here presenting as well, and a few other things, maybe an ice cream truck. But again, July 12th, the time exactly is still TBD, but I hope to see most of you there. So thank you.
Hi, for those who don't know me, my name is Scott Mingus. I'm a Civil War writer here in York. I had a chance last year to have a meeting at Prospect Hill Cemetery with Mark Sands and his son Cameron. These guys have been heavily involved in an interesting project. Years ago, some of you have been around for a while, remember a dear part of our roundtable, lady by the name of Lila Foreman Shaw. She wrote a small pamphlet on the Civil War burials at Prospect Hill Cemetery, which the York County History Center published. Over time, there was a really nice walking tour that went along with that book, but most of those markers were put up fairly temporarily, and almost all of them are in disrepair. So Cameron is going to work on an Eagle Scout project that will be, as I think, an incredible asset to our community. Will help make Prospect Hill Cemetery, again, a destination for people that are interested in the Civil War history of our area. So I'm gonna introduce Cameron. He's also a very talented musician, does taps at Gettysburg as part of the 100 Night Taps, as well as being heavily involved with a lot of community activities. So with that, Cameron? Oh, before Cameron starts, one more thing. Half the proceeds from all the book sales tonight are gonna go to Cameron's project. And we're gonna pass the box around basket. And then anything you put in the basket tonight will also go to his project. So buy books. If you don't wanna buy books, put the money in the basket. We appreciate it.
Is there anything to click with here, or am I just gonna?
Good.
I think what I'm about to talk about now. So when I took a part of this project, there are 16 of these signs along Prospect Hill Cemetery. And I actually have one of them here right now, and you can tell what kind of condition they are in. There are definitely pictures there showing some of them that are there, and those are decent conditions, but there are some that are falling into repair like this one. Yep, and there goes that. I'll stick this down like that. As taking part of this project, it is a very hefty project, is the way to put it. To replace all 16 of these signs, we are including a 17th as a orientation slide, sign to show where the signs are and everything like that. I'm gonna switch this. And it went backwards. I want to talk about how I came across the project because that is also very important here. So as I was told here, I am very into taps and playing for different local cemeteries and services and things like that. And for one of Prospect Hill's 9/11 ceremonies, I was approached afterwards to be asked about this project. They realized my relationship to scouting and saw that I was working my way up to Eagle and asked if I was willing to head the project, and I gratefully accepted that. To replace all 17 of these signs, 16 and add a 17, it is almost over $6,000. It's a part of the company Paneer. They do signs for like Gettysburg National Park. So if you go to any of those, you'll see signs that they've made that we're hoping to replace them with. They're fiberglass embedded, and there's a picture there of what it would look like. Or just slide over posts and sit on that. We are also hoping to get sponsorship plaques. So if you sponsor an entire sign, your name will be on it, or company name, or anything like that. And there's another picture of what one would look like. Any information of me is there. I also have papers over there, so you can stop and talk to me afterwards to get contact information. But I am very grateful to head this project and be able to preserve the history that is already there, and also Lila's, she created that, preserve, and show her legacy and what she did too. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. I'm very excited about your project. I look forward to seeing it in its final phase there. And as Scott had mentioned, portion of his book sales are going to help with your project. And also, as we pass the basket around, the officers of the roundtable have decided that the money collected will go to toward your project. So we're definitely supporting you here at the roundtable and those who are here with us tonight. Before we start tonight's program, just want to give you a preview of what we're going to have next month. Next month on Wednesday, April 16th, Cody Aish will join us. He'll be speaking, giving a program. if it takes 3 years more, Lincoln at the sanitary fairs of 1864. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln spoke at 3 fairs benefiting the Sanitary Commission in Washington, Baltimore, and Philadelphia, pleading for a new definition of the word liberty, promising retribution against Confederates who slaughtered Black US soldiers, and vowing to proceed even if it takes 3 years more. Collectively encompassing the most underappreciated orations of his presidency, set against the backdrop of the Civil War's costliest year and a looming re-election campaign. Cody serves as Director of Education and Interpretation at Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center in Gettysburg, where he served several roles as a member of the staff since 2012. Earned his undergraduate in communications journalism at Shippensburg University in 2014. Began working on a master's in American history at Gettysburg College in 2024. And in addition to museum tours and interpretation, he lectures for the American Battlefield Trust, conferences, National Park Service sites, Civil War roundtables, libraries, and other community organizations. He's a founding contributor to Pennsylvania and the Civil War and writes book reviews for Civil War Monitor and articles for W. Britain's The Standard, and serves as a member of the Gettysburg Magazine editorial board. So definitely looking forward to having him join us here for next month's program. Tonight, we're going to welcome Dominish Miller as she presents The Not So Invisible Women, the Daughters of Charity, contributions during and after the Battle of Gettysburg. Ms. Miller is a Third Circuit Court of Appeals librarian for Middle District of Pennsylvania, founder of Preserving the History of Newberrytown, runs the Lewisberry Area History Lovers Group, and she serves as librarian and volunteer information specialist, chair for the Harrisburg chapter of the NSDAR, and is a founding board member of the Newberrytown Special Events Committee. And she also is a reenactor in the 87th Regiment Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry, Company C. She portrays a private. She's also the author of 2 cookbooks, Preserving the History of Newberrytown, Community Cookbook from Cooks of Newberrytown, in 2 volumes, published in 2021, and is also authored Preserving the History of Newberrytown Then and Now. So let's now welcome Dominish Miller as she speaks about the Daughters of Charity.
See if I can get her to stay up here. I might just hold her. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. As Scott said, I am Dominish Miller, and I'm gonna come to you today with a part of Civil War history that I don't think is talked about enough, and that is the female contributions and the Daughters of Charity. So let me make sure I know which way the clicker works tonight. There we go. So usually when I do this talk, I'm dressed as a Daughters of Charity nun, but I haven't broken out the outfit in a while and it smells like a campfire. So until I get that dry cleaned, I brought a doll with me that I found on eBay, and she is wearing the traditional habit of a Daughters of Charity, which includes the blue dress, her bib, which is a collar, and her coronet. So this is where the flying nun lore came from, was the Daughters of Charity, which I'll explain in a few minutes. But after my presentation tonight, for those of you that are here in person, I have a table of, I have a Bible, some books, and some of the things that I would carry around with me at a reenactment, and then you can come check it out. But to start, I need to tell you about the Daughters of Charity and how they were founded. So the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul was founded in 1633 by St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marcolette in Paris, France. So that was over 391 years ago. And they dedicated themselves to helping the poor and the sick. So this started with just 12 peasant girls. And they were unlike the other sisters at the time in terms of both social and economic status, as well as their desire to live and work among those who needed the help. This challenged conventions when sisters predominantly lived in cloistered nunneries, and they had less interaction with those suffering in the streets, and they focused more on their work inside of the church. At this time in history, a lot of people that became nuns were rich widows or people of means that were able to afford to become a nun, because you have to take a vow of poverty. So when you become a nun, you can't have any debt associated with you when you enter a cloister, when you enter a nunnery. So the fact that they chose peasant girls for this order and that their work was outside of the cloister, outside of the church with the people, it really challenged conventions at the time. On the eve of St. Andrew's feast, the girls bound themselves to Christ with the simple vows that were reaffirmed annually. St. Vincent de Paul wrote that the daughters of charity have, for a convent, the houses of the sick, for cell, a rented room, for chapel, the parish church, for cloister, the streets of the city, for enclosure, obedience, for grill, the fear of God, and for veil, holy modesty. They set up soup kitchens, they organized community hospitals, they established schools and homes for orphan children, and they offered job training, taught the young to read and write, and improved prison conditions. At the start of the Daughters of Charity, St. Louise dedicated the community to the Blessed Mother. And in 1830, Our Lady appeared to St. Catherine Labouré, a daughter of charity, and entrusted her with the miraculous medal. The Daughters of Charity, like I showed you on the doll, wore a coronet, which is a white starched headpiece. And they wore this from 1685 until 1964. And those outfits that they wore were modeled after 17th century French peasant clothing. So when they went out into the streets and into the fields, they saw what the French peasants were wearing. And the women wore these to keep the sun off their faces so they wouldn't get sunburned when they were working in the fields. Now, they weren't as starched and as clean, and they weren't like the wings that you see on the nuns that I showed you, but they modeled them after that. And over time, they sort of took on their own look, and that was how you could distinguish who was Daughters of Charity nun and who wasn't. In the 1960s, the Pope was quoted as saying that the Daughters of Charity coronet was an international symbol of charity, even as the cross is the international symbol of faith. So there was no way that these daughters weren't going out into the community without you knowing who they were. Now, over time, when the 1960s come, the nuns are leaving their cloister, they're leaving the church more and more, they're going farther distances, and of course, now we have the automobile. I want to try and drive a car with one of those coronets. It's not going to work. You're not going to be able to see. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of crashes. I don't even know if you can fit in the car. So it was really more just practical reasons that they changed to what they're wearing today. In the United States, Elizabeth Ann Seton started her own order. And before I go on to Elizabeth Ann Seton, this is some paintings of what the daughters would have looked like in the 1600s and in the 1800s. And you can see it's very distinctive. You're not going to pass one of these nuns and not know what order they came from. But you can see that they really ministered to the sick, to the poor, to those that needed them. And before these religious organizations started, there weren't really things like soup kitchens and orphanages. So these daughters really were the advent of that. And that brings us to Elizabeth Ann Seton, who started the order here in America. She was a recent convert to the Catholic Church, and she hoped to establish the community of Daughters of Charity here in the United States. But she was unable to do so because of the political situation during the Napoleonic Wars. So on July 31st, 1809, she founded the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph in Emmitsburg, Maryland, which you can still visit today. And she started with only 5 sisters. Mother Seton's attire is commonly known as the black cap. And you can see that she's wearing it in this painting. Mother Seton ended up dying in 1821, and the community in Emmitsburg then joined the French Daughters of Charity in 1850, and they adopted the blue habit and the white collar and the coronet. So before they joined with the daughters officially, they were known as the black caps, and they dressed like Mother Seton. It wasn't until they joined with the Daughters of Charity that they officially changed their outfits. The community in Emmitsburg became the first American province of the Daughters of Charity. In late June, elements of the Union Army in the 1860s started moving through Emmitsburg, which would end up being the Battle of Gettysburg. So they ended up moving through property that was owned by the nuns in Emmitsburg. On the estate, there was a convent, there was an orphanage, and there was a school for Catholic girls known as St. Joseph's Academy. And obviously this swelled from just the 5 daughters that it originally started with. On the night of July 27th, as the sisters were preparing for bed, they ended up hearing horses' hooves galloping, and they rushed to the windows where they saw elements of the Army of the Potomac's 3rd Corps, and they encamped near the convent. So you can imagine these sisters quietly at their estate, teaching at the school, maybe singing some hymns, and all of a sudden There's an entire army camped right outside of your estate. And it turned out that the troops were part of Torbrand's brigade, whom Sister Marie Louise Crawford described as being tired and hungry as wolves. So not only do you have a brigade outside your window, you have men that are hungry and they're tired and they're thirsty and they've been marching for God knows how long. So the next day, the sisters provided the men with bread, butter, and coffee, a task which Sister Camilla O'Keefe said was the pleasure for the sisters to be able to satisfy the hunger of so many. I'm sure the men really appreciated that as well. Sister Maria Louise Crawford and Sister Camilla O'Keefe likely provided some for the soldiers with more than the last meals that they would ever eat. So a lot of these men, they probably never had another homemade meal after this. And they marched off to Gettysburg after they were camped outside of Emmitsburg. Emmitsburg is only about 10 miles from Gettysburg, so they could hear the battle as it was happening. And obviously these women knew what was happening when the men started marching by. And here's some pictures of what the daughters looked like around the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. You can see here's a sort of a class picture, I would call it. And then here they are on the battlefield nursing the soldiers. So the Battle of Gettysburg resulted in more than 45,000 Union and Confederate casualties. More than 230 daughters of charity served as nurses during the Civil War. This is a time when women weren't allowed to be doctors. This was a time when women at first weren't allowed to be nurses, which I find very funny. They thought women didn't have the Constitution to be a nurse. Who's delivering babies? Who's actually delivering physically the baby, not just as a nurse, but as a woman? And you had to dress very modestly. You couldn't wear any cosmetics. You had to be a woman of a certain age to serve as a nurse. But they discovered pretty quickly during the Civil War that they didn't have enough men. They didn't have enough men to be doctors and to be nurses, so they had to slowly allow these women to take on the role. And the Daughters of Charity and all of the religious sisters that participated during the Civil War, they really proved themselves. The Emmitsburg community of Daughters of Charity provided nearly 1/3 of the Catholic nuns that nursed wounded soldiers during the Civil War. Father Francis Burlando was the chaplain of the Daughters of Charity in Emmitsburg, and he was the one that gathered a small group of sisters to travel to Gettysburg to care for the wounded soldiers. The party set out on July 5th, and as they made their way toward the town of Gettysburg, they traveled through the heart of the battlefield. Thus, they encountered the gory aftermath of the battle, and I think this is an aspect of the Battle of Gettysburg that doesn't get talked about enough. Of course, the battle was crazy and horrible, and it impacted so many people, but think about what is left behind after a battle. Someone has to clean that up. Someone has to deal with that. And Father Burlando recalled, "What we encountered, the gory aftermath of battle firsthand. What a frightful spectacle met our gaze. Horses burnt, dead bodies of both armies strewn here and there, an immense number of slain horses, thousands of bayonets, sabers, wagons, wheels, projectiles of all dimensions, blankets, caps, clothing of every color covered the woods and the fields. We were compelled to drive very cautiously to avoid passing over the dead. Our terrified horses drew back or darted forward, reeling from one side to the other. The farther we advanced, the more harrowing the scene. We could not restrain our tears. The inhabitants were just emerging from the cellars of which they had fled to safety during the combat. Terror was depicted on every countenance. All was confusion." So you can imagine that these nuns leaving their convent, they had no idea what they were going to encounter. And they encountered just death everywhere. Human death and animal death. And of course, the people that lived in Gettysburg, they were the ones that had to clean it up. It didn't matter if that was your job or not. You lived there, and if you didn't want to keep walking past dead bodies and dead horses, someone had to help clean it up. So when they finally made it into Gettysburg and they got past all of this, they started helping to nurse the soldiers. Now, this is a photograph of myself in my habit. This was at the 160th Gettysburg. That was at the Daniel Lady Farm. And then here's a painting, so you can see I tried to be as authentic as I possibly could. When they finally got to Gettysburg, they went to St. Francis Xavier Roman Catholic Church on High Street. Here, the sisters cared for the men of the 3rd Division of the Army of Potomac's 1st Corps. The sisters provided invaluable services at St. Francis Xavier. The hospital was understaffed due to the high volume of wounded soldiers there. Many of them had been there since the church had been converted into a hospital on the day of July 1st. The sisters, as a result, were constantly at work. They were cleaning wounds and soothing the dying soldiers. The sisters who nursed at St. Francis Xavier became popular amongst the wounded soldiers for the selfless care which they provided. In recognition, the Daughters of Charity efforts in St. Francis Xavier, as well as at Gettysburg and other hospitals, earned them a plaque and a stained glass window at St. Francis Xavier Church. And one of the daughters at the DAR talk that I gave last week, she sent her husband down to Gettysburg to St. Francis Xavier, and he got a bunch of postcards there at the church that have the stained glass window. So before you leave today, feel free to take one of the postcards with you. So by July 6th, there were 11 sisters in Gettysburg that were nursing the soldiers. They were tasked with cleaning the wounds, some of which had been infested with maggots by the time that they were ended up getting the care that they needed. They ended up combing lice out of the hair of the wounded soldiers amongst their other duties. An unfortunate side effect of this aspect of service was that many of them ended up bringing the lice and the vermin that they hid in their clothes back to Emmitsburg when they finally returned home. Not only did the soldiers provide medical care, but they also performed baptism for dying soldiers that requested it. They would sit by their bedside. They just offered some bedside manner. They would pray with them. They would offer last rites. They would offer baptism. They would write letters home for them. There was about 60 Confederate prisoners, of whom Sister Camilla O'Keefe said their religion had been live as long as you could and enjoy life while it lasted before they were baptized as Catholics. And you have to remember that at this time in Gettysburg and the area in South Central Pennsylvania in general was very anti-Catholic, and it was very pro-Protestant. So a lot of the people were very weary of these Catholic sisters coming in and trying to help these wounded soldiers, but they won them over. The sisters found men lying on the church pews, under the pews, on the boards placed across the pews. There was blood and there was bathing wounds that kept the straw on the floor constantly wet under the sisters' feet. There was gangrenous wounds infected, so you can imagine the stench in the air. This is in July. This is in a church that didn't have air conditioning. You didn't have the luxury of, just throwing open the windows and letting it air out, because the entire town was like this, covered in blood, covered in gore. So I can only imagine how horrible it was. The stench was nearly unbearable for all of the sisters. The Daughters of Charity were one of 12 orders of Catholic nuns that served as nurses during the American Civil War. And their important work as nurses was instrumental in softening that anti-Catholic sentiment that was widespread in not only South Central Pennsylvania, but in America at the time. The change in feeling was present in the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg, when an old man traveled to the town and found his wounded son there after the Battle of Gettysburg. He checked into the Gettysburg Hotel, and upon seeing the Daughters of Charity coming and going from the hotel, caring for the wounded soldiers, he asked the hotel's owner, "Good God, can those sisters be the persons whose religion we always run down?" The owner replied, "Yes, they are the very persons who are run down by those who know nothing of their charity." And here's an example of that plaque that I was talking about in the gorgeous window that is on the postcard that I'll give to you after this. So one of the most remarkable stories, and this is something that I always like to point out when I give this presentation, and it's a true story, is there were two sisters that were members of the Emmitsburg Daughters of Charity. They were sisters Veronica and Serena Klemensky. So in addition to caring for the wounded soldiers, they were responsible for searching the battlefield for soldiers still living amongst the dead. So now you have to remember, this is July 5th and 6th by the time they've gotten there. You could have been shot and wounded on July 1st, and you could still be laying on the battlefield crying for water, crying for someone to just kill you and put you out of your misery, crying to be taken to a field hospital. The way field hospitals worked during the Civil War is they would go out and they would find the people that they could help the quickest. If you had a bullet wound that shattered your leg and they thought they could cut your leg off and save your life, they would take you to the field hospital. If your entire chest cavity is ripped open and they don't think they can save you, they're going to leave you to die on the battlefield. They would send people out with some water and some whiskey. They would hope that they could make you as comfortable as possible, pray with you, talk to you, see if you have any last words that they would record. But unfortunately, some people just laid there and they languished. And it was these sisters' job to go out and find soldiers that were still alive. And then they also wanted to go out and find any men that might have perished recently that hadn't been buried yet. So on the battlefield, on one occasion, the sisters, Veronica and Serena, they went out and they encountered a man that was on Culp's Hill, and his face was covered in blood and he was crying out for water. So I'm not sure what day he was wounded, but again, this was July 5th or 6th after the battle, and he had been laying there probably for at least 2 or 3 days at this point. When they wiped the blood from his face, they discovered that it was their biological brother. So what are the odds coming all the way from Emmitsburg, Maryland, up to Culp's Hill in Gettysburg? You didn't even know that you were going to be there, and you find your brother wounded after the Battle of Gettysburg. So it was their brother Thaddeus, and he was a private in the 1st Maryland Battalion, which was a Confederate regiment that would later become known as the 2nd Maryland, and he had been badly wounded attacking the Union's positions on Culp's Hill. Sister Serena was able to nurse her brother back to health, and he ended up surviving the war. There will be no medals for the Daughters of Charity or the women of religious orders that helped to minister to the wounded during the Civil War. However, St. Xavier's Church in Gettysburg installed this beautiful glass window and a bronze plaque to remember the Daughters of Charity that served Gettysburg wounded. And in Washington, D.C., the Ancient Order of Pilgrims erected a monument in 1924 to honor all the various orders of sisters who gave their service as nurses in battlefields and in hospitals during the Civil War. The women behind the monument, Ellen Ryan Jolly, later wrote that it was perhaps the most fitting tribute to these amazing women. She wrote, "The nuns had no ambition for earthly honors, but their hearts ached in sympathy for the bruised and the bleeding, the sick and the dying of a house divided against itself." So you can see that these women, they lived their life's work, they lived their faith. Their entire mission was to help those in need. And there was probably no one more in need than the wounded soldiers after the Battle of Gettysburg. They ended up staying in Gettysburg for about 6 months. So you could have been taken to the hospital and you could have been treated there, and you could have stayed in that church on the pews, on the floor, with blood and guts and gore for up to 6 months. And they stayed and they helped, and occasionally they would go back down to Maryland because it was only 10 miles away, and they would switch places with other sisters. They rotated between the group that was with them, and they finally got their recognition. I think they deserve more recognition than what they received, but if you ever get a chance to go to Emmitsburg, they have this wonderful candlelight tour that you can go on. You can tour the entire campus and a lot of the historical buildings on campus, and they have docents there that are dressed as Daughters of Charity, that are dressed as some of the nuns or some of the girls that would have attended the school at the time. They sing hymns, and they show you how they taught the girls to make arts and crafts and some of the things they would have taught them in school. And it's a really beautiful tribute to the daughters and to Elizabeth Ann Seton. But if you ever get the chance, please go to St. Francis Xavier in Gettysburg, go see the plaque, go see the beautiful stained glass window, and there's plenty of books out there, and there's articles online that you can read about that teach you more about what the daughters did and the impact that they made. And maybe that's why there's more Catholics in South Central Pennsylvania now. Who knows, maybe they converted a few people that weren't just a wounded soldier. But I thought this quote was amazing, that the sick and the dying of a house divided against itself. So I think that was a really poignant quote that she said. But if you want to read more, these are some of the resources I used. I also have 3 books over here on the table that I used to make my presentation. But if you have any questions, I'm done with the presentation. So thank you for coming. Yes.
The heroism of post battles, we don't spend enough time on, so thank you for pointing that
Thank
out.
you. Yeah, I agree. He said that we don't spend enough time on the heroism post-battle. And I agree. And Cameron and his father and I were talking before this presentation about, just the smells that would have lingered and the sights that you would have seen. These battles come through your town, and it's not like you see on television or a movie where it happens and it's over. Someone has to deal with the aftermath. So
I don't mean to show how stupid I may be, but did you say that the order of the sisters stayed in one place and nursed to one group of soldiers?
yes.
Was that typical in Gettysburg, where a group was there and being nursed and another group here being nursed?
Yeah, so it depended where the field hospitals were. So depending on where you were hurt on the battlefield, depended which field hospital you would be taken to. Because these were Catholic nuns, they set up shop in St. Francis Xavier Church, which was a Catholic church. So that's why they stayed there, and it just so happened that the men of that particular group were brought to that church. So, and you have to understand that, again, this is, you know, a few days after the battle. And the entire place is just overrun with wounded. So it takes a while to get through them all. And if you're having an amputation, or say you have an infection that starts, that's gonna linger. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't understand that you had to wash the instruments between amputations.
So a particular group of soldiers was urged to go to.
Well, they were just picked up and taken there,
Okay.
because it would be like the closest field hospital, or it would be the field hospital that had enough staff to help. And it was a very understaffed field hospital, which is why the daughters went there. They sort of showed up in town and said, where can I help? And they're Catholic, so they went to the Catholic church and they said, yeah, we need help, we don't have enough people. Come in and just, you know, they were desperate, honestly, unfortunately, so. Yes.
I know they weren't nurses, but did they have any medical training whatsoever?
Not in the sense that they never went to university, they never went to a school that properly taught them, medical training. But they would have known just from growing up in the time period, how to dress a wound, how to deal with a sick person, because again, you're not doing the things like you would today, you're not writing a prescription, you're not administering any, IVs or shots or anything like that. So medical training back then really was, here's some water, here's some soap if you have it, here's a bandage, wrap it around, you know, pull the tourniquet tight, that sort of nursing. A lot of the nursing was more, here, let me feed you, let me wipe your brow. Oh, this person has a fever, quick, we need to get a cold rag, that sort of nursing, not like the nursing you hear today. But as far as medical training, I'm sure many of them had midwifery training as far as being able to deliver babies, and maybe, you know, oh, you were in a farm accident, you got a cut, I know how to deal with that. But nothing, you know, that's why the doctors, the surgeons were in charge of cutting and stitching and that sort of thing. Yes.
If you mentioned it, I missed it, but Elizabeth Ann Seton
Yes.
was named the first American-born saint,
Yes,
I believe by John Paul II.
I believe you're correct.
But that makes her and that vocation very unique because she's the first.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and if you've ever watched the movie Doubt with Meryl Streep, that takes place in the Baltimore area, and that sect of nuns, they wear the black caps like Elizabeth Ann Seton. So I think that was one of the first depictions in film that really got that out there for as far as Elizabeth Ann Seton. But yeah, Emmitsburg it's an amazing place to visit if you get to go to the Seton Shrine.
And in conjunction with what this gentleman asked about their nursing skills, being in an isolated convent with students and the number of people in their community, they would have had to have nursed one another.
Oh, absolutely, yes, and
Kids who injured themselves and all those, so I mean, they would have picked up some practical skills just based on their lifestyle.
yes, and their calling was to help the poor and the sick out on the streets, so they were unique in the fact that they also left the convent and they went out and they helped people. So, you know, if you think about the time period, there were so many poor and orphaned people living on the streets that I'm sure that they had medical needs that the sisters helped with as well. Yes.
Tommy, just a quick question. They obviously were at Gettysburg. Were any of these ladies involved in Antietam?
Not this particular group that I'm aware of, and I'm sorry that I haven't looked into that more, but I'm sure that there were religious sisters involved. But that's a really good question. I should look into that more. You keep me on my toes. Yeah. Yes.
Excuse me. I read the book, The Battlefield Angels.
Yeah, I have that over here.
One of the books you were recommending.
Yeah.
And there was an awful lot of first person accounts
Mhm.
from the sisters on the battlefield, which
Mhm.
I would recommend for people that were further interested in the more the stories.
Absolutely.
The sisters shared.
Yeah, Camilla O'Keefe, Sister Camilla O'Keefe, she was one that wrote extensively about her experiences on the battlefield and firsthand accounts. So,
I did notice that some of them died fairly young in life.
oh, absolutely. So, just the nature of the beast, again, they didn't have germ theory. So if you're helping wounded soldiers that have infected wounds that are probably coming in already ill with dysentery or typhoid or, you know, anything that you could have caught during that time, you're going to catch it yourself. And if you're working around dirty surgical instruments, you're probably going to nick yourself and get cut, or, I mean, you're standing in ankle deep sludge. I mean, sorry to be graphic, but there's blood and there's excrement and there's like mold growing from the wet straw. You know, it's not a healthy environment. So I'm sure a lot of the sisters did die fairly young just from picking up illnesses during the Civil War. And there are firsthand accounts of nurses, not necessarily just religious sisters, but nurses in general during the Civil War that got sick nursing the soldiers and passed away fairly quickly after starting their jobs in field hospitals. So unfortunately, it was the nature of the beast. Yes,
I toured the shrine with my sister
did you?
pre-COVID,
Yeah.
and she dragged me down there. We grew up, we went to Catholic school for
Mhm.
years, so she, wanted to go down, and we were so close, you know, Emmitsburg is so close to us here in York. And it is beautiful, like you said.
It
And
is.
the cathedral, I guess, on the campus,
Mhm.
is just breathtaking.
Yeah, they have
All
a,
the stained glass windows, it is just.
it is, yeah, they have a great museum that you can walk into and it
They do.
shows you the different elements of the habit. And it actually, they have a video of one of the sisters that was at the convent when they still wore the big coronets. And she takes you step by step on how every morning they would get it out, they would iron it, they would starch it, and they would form it around their heads and they would pin it. And honestly, I don't know how they did it every day, and I don't know how they kept them clean. Because they really did. I mean, these things were bright white and you could knock on it and you could hear yourself knocking back. That's how starched these things were. When my friend helped me put together my outfit for the 160th Gettysburg, she basically got a 20-gallon bin, a Rubbermaid bin, and filled it with liquid starch. And just put the fabric in it and kept going like this until it stood straight. And then somehow we were able to form it around my head. But yeah, it just, the amount of work that they went through to get dressed was amazing. Again, it's the sign of the times. This outfit started in the 1600s. So it was very different than it is today. But I really couldn't imagine being a nurse after the Battle of Gettysburg, coming in with this giant coronet and having to worry about keeping it clean, because you only got one. So, I mean, you could buy another one, but I mean, you're in a field hospital, so you're not really worried about that. But somehow they really did manage to, do practical things that we do today, wearing this giant coronet. So they were amazing in more ways than one. Anyone else?
Tommy, do you mind if I tell a quick little story?
Please do.
There was more than 200 Confederate soldiers were brought to York after the Battle of Gettysburg. The US Army Hospital was sold out of beds, they had no room, so the Army rented for $75 the Oddfellows Hall on South George Street for these 200 rebels. One of the Confederate wounded that was being treated here in York was in pretty bad shape. And when they found out he was a Catholic, they moved the guy down to Emmitsburg. And so the daughters there could nurse him as he died, and he was buried there. I don't think he was eventually dug up and taken back to the South. But he, as far as I know, was the only Confederate wounded soldier actually to be buried on the campus at St. Mary's. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for,
Do they have many young women that become sisters anymore?
I mean, I guess it depends what you think is many. It's definitely, the vocations are waning, unfortunately. I know the Midwest has a resurgence in young people joining the vocations as priests and nuns. I'm not really sure about where it stands in the Emmitsburg area. But I'm sure, like anything else, they could use more. So, I think however you come to the church and however you come to your vocation, that's up to you, but I'm not sure about how many young people. I know, for myself, I'm a member of the Harrisburg Diocese, And it was right before COVID, there was a girl in our young adult Catholic group that she left home and joined a convent up in New England area. And she was probably 30 at the time, so I'd consider that pretty young to, enter into religious life. But yeah, I'm not sure about the numbers that are currently entering at a young age, but I mean, there definitely are. So.
A lot of African nations are producing a lot of religion.
Yes, the African Catholics are very devout, and at Holy Infant Church in Manchester, we have Father Dominic, who is a pretty young priest that has come to us, and he's now our full-time pastor, so, yeah.
Do the Daughters of Charity still exist, or?
Yeah, the Daughters of Charity absolutely still exist. Yeah, no, they're plentiful across the entire world. I'm pretty sure most countries probably have an order of the Daughters of Charity. I don't want to speak to that, as fact, because I'm not sure. But I know at least here in America, they are alive and well, and throughout the entire country, and obviously still very active in France, which is where they were formed. And again, because of they're tied to the miraculous medal, that you can go to the church where St. Catherine Labouré saw Mary, and you can actually go to the spot that she said she saw Mary, and a lot of people pilgrimage to that church in France for that experience. So. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I have some postcards for everyone. My business cards are over here, and then you can see some of the stuff that I carry around in my basket when I'm reenacting as a nun. So, thank you.